So we'd also like to thank the Johnson County Library Foundation for providing those books to give away at tonight's author talk. And also a big thank you to Indiana Humanities as well as our Indiana Author Award for sponsoring this author visit. So here's a little bit about our author before I turn it over to her. Axton Betz-Hamilton is the author of The Less People Know About Us, a mystery of betrayal, family secrets, and stolen identity, which received the 2020 Edgar Award for Best Fact Crime. A Portland, Indiana native, she graduated from Jay County High School and earned a BS in Agriculture Economics and an MS in Consumer Sciences and Retailing, both from Purdue University. She also earned a PhD in Human Development and Family Studies from Iowa State University and a graduate certificate in Family Financial Planning from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Currently, she's an assistant professor of consumer affairs at the South Dakota State University, and she and her husband, Robert, have 6 cats. So we are very excited to welcome Axton Betz-Hamilton to JCPL.
Well, thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
I would like to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint for all of you. I think I can do this. Yes, it's giving me the power to do that. Okay. So I have lots of practice with online PowerPoints, given that I'm a professor in the era of COVID. So this PowerPoint presentation, I promise, will not feel like a lecture. I'm going to talk about the book and more about myself and share some pictures with you and talk about where things are now, because the book left off in 2019 and it's 2021. So things have changed a little bit. There's some excitement and some different activities. So I'll share that with you as well. And at the end of my introduction, Kelly did mention that my husband and I have 6 cats. You might hear one. In the room I'm sitting in, I shut the door to keep the kitties out, and one was howling at the door. So you might see him wandering around behind me. He might jump up on the desk because it's an hour until dinner time, which means he really thinks he needs it now. So you might get to meet another character in the book, one of my cats. So in this presentation, I'll talk about my early life. Again, I'm a native of Portland, Indiana, and I'll share where that is, as a lot of people, even in Indiana, aren't familiar with Portland. Talk about college and graduate school. I'll then talk about my career, because my career did help me identify the identity theft perpetrator, and being a victim of identity theft shaped my career choices. I'll then talk about discovering the perpetrator. I'll share some clues and evidence with you. If you've read the book, you may remember that my dad found a credit card statement in a file box of my mom's, and it was a credit card that was in my name that was taken out as part of the identity theft. I've scanned that credit card statement, and I'm going to share that with you tonight. And then talk about how this book came to be. And it really was an accident. In the way it came to be and its final product was not how I envisioned it. So I'll talk about how that all came about. So Portland, as you can see from the map on the left, it's northeast of Muncie, between Fort Wayne and Richmond on US 27, and it's really close to the Ohio border. I actually grew up on US 27 south of Portland, and this is a photo of the house that I grew up in. So on the other side, kind of behind the house a little bit and to the left, if you can see my cursor right about here, there was a mobile home. And that was the house that I lived in from 0 to age 11. And then my grandfather passed away when I was 11, and we moved into his house. So his house is the limestone ranch here in the front. So I lived there from 11 until when I went to college at 18, and then my parents sold this property when I was 19. So a little bit about my early life. In the book, I mentioned Greg and Kathy, who owned the skating rink, and my dad and Greg were best friends growing up. And I spent a lot of time at the skating rink in the 80s and the early 90s, and had a really good friend there who was also, her parents were also friends with Greg and Kathy, and she was a couple years older than me. And we would skate every Sunday afternoon. There was a Sunday afternoon skate, and we would do the races. We would do the limbo game that they would do during the skate. It was really fun, you know, and really enjoyed those times at the skating rink. Greg and Kathy sold the skating rink when I was 10, turning 11. So those days at the skating rink ended. But fun fact, since this is a library presentation, the Carrie that I'm referring to, for those of you affiliated with the library, you may know her because she is the librarian at the Farmland Public Library, and her name's Carrie Watson. So while growing up, I was a 10-year member of Jay County 4-H, and I was a member of the Cat Club for 10 years. So cats have been a lifelong love of mine. I mean, obviously, since we have 6, and my husband says they're all mine. Even though he likes them, he still says they're my cats. So I've had cats forever. You know, we had a cat that was in the house before I was born. So I've always grown up around cats, loved cats. So it seemed perfectly fitting to become a member of the Cat Club, and I showed cats for 10 years. I also showed poultry. So it was a photo of me here with the champion turkey at the Jay County Fair in 1995. I showed goat for several years. I did the Do Your Own Thing project, personality, veterinary science, and so on and so forth. And one year, and I forget which year it was, but I signed up for and completed 17 projects. So one of the rules that my dad had with 4-H was if you sign up for the project in February, which was back then, that's when you signed up for 4-H for the year. If you sign up for it in February, you're going to stay committed to it and finish it and some project when the fair comes around in August. And he held me to that. So 4-H was what really introduced me to Purdue and got me interested in going to college at Purdue. Now, before the college years, the identity theft began in 1993. So this is when I was 11, and this is when my grandfather passed away. So the identity theft began shortly after he passed away, and we moved into his house. And at that time, there was mail that my parents were expecting that just wasn't arriving. And that mail was, bills and pre-approved credit card offers, things like that, magazines, my pen pal letters, that there were things that they were expecting that could be used by an identity thief that just weren't arriving in the mail. And back then we had a metal mailbox at the side of the highway. I remember it was this big yellow metal box. And Mom was the first person to call it identity theft. And she said that hers and Dad's identities had been stolen and that someone was stealing their mail, and that the way to stop the mail theft was to get a post office box in town. Because at the time, she said it's likely that somebody's driving up and down the highway and stealing mail from mailboxes when the owners aren't home. So, just driving down the road in the middle of the day, pulling over to mailboxes, taking the mail out, and continuing on down the road. And then using whatever personal information they could get from that mail to commit identity theft. So mom got a post office box in town, and the mail still kept disappearing. So it was theorized that the person responsible was working in the post office. And I have an uncle on my dad's side that at that time worked for the postal system, and he had a criminal history. And so mom said, well, it's very likely that it's him. And, as the identity theft continued to evolve, because the individual responsible was so good at the identity theft of my parents, that it had to be someone who knew a lot about them, like a close relative or a close family friend. So in order to protect ourselves, we started withdrawing from those relationships. So no talking with relatives, no talking with friends of the family, no more talking with Greg and Kathy, no more talking with aunts and uncles, no more holidays beyond the immediate family. Also, our landline was turned off, and mom said that was due to the identity theft, and that our neighbor's son worked for the phone company, and that he might be responsible for the identity theft because of a dispute over a property line that his dad and my grandfather had back in the 80s. Along with that, because of that isolation and because of the assumption that the identity thief was someone we knew and someone close to us, even if I knew who was at the door, if someone came to the door, I wasn't allowed to answer it. Pretend you're not home, go hide. If you're home alone, go hide. Along with that, I wasn't allowed to open the curtains if I was home alone. And it got to the point where I wasn't even allowed outside as a teenager if no one was home. Because again, we didn't know who the identity thief was. And my parents were concerned that the person responsible for the identity theft might escalate it into something more serious and make it more physical. So Jay County High School had a graduation option where you could graduate after 7 semesters. And that was the option I took, and I went directly to college. So I graduated from high school on December 23rd, and by January 7th, I was moved into my dorm room at Purdue. So as Kelly mentioned in my introduction, I received 2 degrees from Purdue, a bachelor's in agricultural economics, as well as a master's in consumer sciences and retailing. And I went on to Iowa State to complete my doctorate in human development and family studies. Now, during the college years, during my years at Purdue, I learned that I was a victim of identity theft when I was 19. And when I was 19, I moved off campus and got my first studio apartment. And I called the electric company to establish service. And they told me the date and time they would be there, and things are moving along. This is great. And a few days later, I receive a letter from them in the mail that says, due to your credit score, we are requiring a $100 deposit for electric service. And there was a number to call at the bottom of the letter for a copy of my credit report. And I called it out of curiosity because I'd never heard of a credit report. I didn't know what it was. I thought that the issue was that I didn't have enough credit. I shouldn't have had credit at 19. Beyond a couple of student loans, name, address, student loans, that should have been it. Half of a page, tops. So I thought it was because I didn't have enough credit. And that was the issue with the electric company. So I called and ordered a copy of my credit report. And when it came about 6 weeks later, it came in a very large manila envelope that I remember was sticking out of the top of the mailbox at the side of my apartment building. And when I got it out of the mailbox, there was a return address from the credit reporting agency, and it was really thick. And credit reports must be really hard to read. They must come with a lot of instructions and disclosures. And, it's the end of the day. And do I really want to deal with this? That was what was going through my mind at 19. And I went inside my little studio apartment and sat on the arm of the hand-me-down floral print couch that I had, opened the envelope, and realized very quickly that credit reports are not difficult to read. They don't come with a lot of instructions and disclosures, but rather mine was 10 pages long, full of fraudulent credit card entries and associated collection agency entries that dated back to when I was 11, which was when my parents' identities were stolen. So it was assumed at that point that the person responsible for their identity theft was also responsible for mine, because the identity theft started for all three of us in 1993. So the first person I called was Mom, and she said that, the identity thieves, they've moved on, they've used your credit for, everything they could get. And they really did. My credit score, when I got this credit report at 19, was 380. And it was in the second percentile of all credit scores in the nation, according to the little bell curve that they gave me with the credit report. And she said, the identity theft, it's stopped. They've used your identity for everything they can use it for. They've moved on to some other victim. And, that was it. Mom was very matter of fact about it, very calm about it. But when I called Dad, his reaction was more like mine. His reaction about broke the phone receiver. Because for him, it was one thing to harm him, but it was another thing to harm his child. And that really made a difference for him in terms of how he felt about the identity theft. So because of this experience, and because of what I felt was a lack of understanding and support for me as an identity theft victim, I focused my master's research on identity theft. And when I say lack of support, one example of that is that day that I got my credit report, I got my phone and I sat down and I made up my mind, I'm going to start calling original creditors, going to explain this is identity theft. I was underage when the credit cards were established. Please remove this from my credit report. These shouldn't have been long conversations. The first creditor that I called was a major credit card company in the United States, still is. I called them and the customer service representative said that I wasn't an identity theft victim. And the reason she said that was because someone had made 2 payments on the credit card. And she said, identity thieves don't do that. Identity thieves just take out a credit card, run up the charges on it quickly, and then never pay it. And so, she was essentially calling me a liar. And so that first reach out for support that I made at 19 to say, hey, I'm a victim of identity theft, please help, I was essentially told I was a liar. The Indiana State Police took a police report, and they gave me a copy of the police report, but there was no further response than that. Now, as a researcher in this area, I know that that's actually a pretty good response. Some law enforcement agencies, particularly back at that time, didn't take reports on identity theft, just refused to do it. And then, some law enforcement agencies did put forth some additional resources to try and find the identity thief, given the particulars of, a given case. But my case, they just took a police report, gave me a copy of it, said that I would need to give copies of it to original creditors, and wished me good luck. So I was very frustrated going through this process because it seemed like every time I reached out for help, I wasn't getting help. And when I would, you know, apply for utility service or apply for cable TV service, I'd always have to pay a security deposit. And there was shame associated with that because these customer service representatives look at your credit report and, kind of give you the side eye of, well, you don't pay your bills. Well, it's not me. And I got so tired of saying it's not me and not being heard. So I wanted to change things. I wanted to change things for myself, for other victims, and for future victims. So I focused my master's research on identity theft and then focused my doctoral research on child identity theft, specifically exploring the experiences of identity theft victims who had their identity stolen while they were children, but didn't learn of the identity theft until they were at least age 18. So, as I mentioned, this is my research area. More broadly, I focus on financial abuse within families. That includes identity theft perpetrated by family members. It also includes elder financial exploitation perpetrated by family members. So there's a couple pictures here of me giving a talk, and then a photo of me when I was a part of an interview for WGN in Chicago a few years ago. So as part of my efforts with identity theft professionally, I received the 2012 American Association of Family and Consumer Sciences New Achiever Award. And I received this award for my research contributions and outreach in the area of child identity theft. So I was a brand new assistant professor, and the conference happened to be in Indianapolis. And my parents were able to come down and see me get the award. So here's a photo of me holding my plaque, dad's on one side and mom's on the other. So while we didn't know it at the time, in this photo, when this photo was taken, mom had cancer, but we didn't know it until a couple months later. And she was having some really unexplained health problems, and it was an odd constellation of symptoms. And she got progressively worse to the point where she had to be taken to the emergency room. And she went to the emergency room at Ball Hospital in Muncie, and it was more than they could handle. So they transferred her down to IU in Indianapolis. And on the day that I formally graduated with my doctorate, that was the day that mom was diagnosed with cancer. And so she was diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoblastic leukemia. And so you can see the photo on the left. This is her and I shortly after she was admitted back in August of 2012. And so at this time, mom was receiving inpatient chemo at the Simon Cancer Center at IU Medical Center for 30 days. So every day she got a chemo treatment for 30 days, inpatient. And then they would send her back to Ball Hospital for 2 weeks for outpatient chemotherapy treatment daily. So she would have to go over to Ball Hospital and get chemotherapy treatments there, and then spend the next 30 days back at IU for inpatient daily chemotherapy treatments. That is a really tough regimen. Burkitt's is a really difficult cancer to beat, and the treatment protocol, it's really rough on those who unfortunately develop this type of cancer. So mom's cancer eventually ended up being identified as resistant to chemotherapy. And then she had 18 straight days of radiation treatment that was ordered. She made it through 15 before the doctors told my dad there's nothing more they can do. And, when I got that call from Dad, I've never experienced a shock like that to where I couldn't drive, to where, I was physically okay. I could walk, I could move my arms, I could talk, but I didn't have my wits enough about me to drive. So I called my then fiance, who's now my husband, told him what was going on. And I said, you have to come down here. And at that time, he was working for John Deere in East Moline, Illinois. And said, you have to come get me. And I was an assistant professor in Southern Illinois at this point. So you've got to come get me. I can't drive. You got to drive me over, over to IU. And I said, and bring a suit because you're going to get married in it. And well, you can wear it to the funeral too. I mean, this is what was going through my head, because Mom was 56 and I thought, I had a lot of years left with Mom, at least 30, and so I wanted to jam in as many life milestones as, any kid wants their parents to see before they pass away. And one of those was getting married. And I'd been engaged for quite a while, so it wasn't a surprise, that we were getting married. But we got married in Mom's hospital room before she passed away. So this is a photo of that. I got married in my regalia because I did not have a wedding dress, and Mom was too sick to see me walk at graduation. So she hadn't seen me in my regalia. So I got married in my doctoral regalia. The flowers you see that I'm holding and the corsages that everyone's wearing, that was courtesy of the nurses at the hospital who, when we went home to get our clothes, the nurses spent their own money and transformed Mom's hospital room. They bought flowers, they made corsages, they bought sparkling grape juice and cupcakes and put a runner on the floor and put rose petals on it. So phenomenal job by the oncology nurses at the hospital. So 2 weeks after my mom passed away, my dad calls me and he's livid. And straight out of the gate, he starts yelling at me for running a credit card over limit in 2001. And I said, Dad, what are you talking about? I didn't run a credit card over limit. What are you talking about? And he's yelling, yes, you did. I have the credit card statement in my hand. And I said, well, what credit card statement is it? And he said, well, it's First USA. And I said, Dad, that was one of the credit cards that was taken out my name as part of the identity theft. What's Mom doing with that? And he said, I don't know, but it's in a file folder with a copy of your birth certificate. And my blood ran cold because as a professional in this area, as a researcher, I knew that there's no logical reason for my birth certificate and a credit card statement to be in a file folder together, unless Mom was trying to either prove the credit card wasn't mine or trying to prove that it was, and that maybe First USA questioned the credit card and requested further proof of my identity, and Mom obtained it with my birth certificate. The other reason that my blood ran cold with this was because at that time, I didn't know what birth certificate Dad was talking about, because I had my original birth certificate. And it turns out that the birth certificate that was in the file folder with this credit card statement was a certified copy issued by the health department on June 7th of 2000. And there's no way I could have obtained that myself because I was taking summer courses at Purdue on June 7th of 2000. And so the picture here is what the building looked like that Dad found the file box certificate in. So this was a building that had been damaged by fire in the preceding year. that had not been repaired yet, and had Dad not been home when the fire started, this evidence would have been lost. It would have. So just, I think it's weird how the stars align sometimes to, to preserve things like this. So, I should back up. So this workbench here. So this is in an outbuilding on my parents' property that my dad still owns today. And the file box was actually sitting, where's my cursor? About right here. When he found it, it's a blue plastic file box. And this was a building that Mom had kept a lot of files in, a lot of boxes, like old backpacks, things like that, because she kind of used it as an office area for a while. And then it just sort of became a default storage area for stuff for her. And Dad was going through everything. And I told Dad, I said, don't throw anything away until I get there. And I said, anything you find that doesn't make sense, put it on the workbench. And when I come home over spring break, which would have been in 2 weeks from this conversation, I said, I'll take a look at it then and I'll try and make sense of it. So 2 weeks later, the mound on the workbench, if you can see my cursor, was about like this, just mounded up with papers. And there were things that my dad found that were very strange financial transactions, like denial letters for out-of-state checking accounts, and his name and her name, a purchase agreement for a house where everyone signed the purchase agreement, seller, realtor, the buyer's agent, and the only signature missing was hers. And we didn't know what was quite going on there. But I did find out that she had every intention, at least on the surface, of buying a different house. But never signed the purchase agreement. So it's just a lot of strange things like that. And pay stubs in her maiden name. Just lots of weird things that painted a really dark picture financially. So with all of this documentation, I knew a lot of clues were probably on her laptop. So I started digging for more clues and evidence. And these are pictures of some of the clues that I found in program files on her computer. So these photos were in the program files folder instead of the documents folder or the pictures folder. And I can tell you the condo complex where this photo was taken. So it was taken from the inside of a condo. I know exactly where it is just from some of my internet searching and knowing some of the behaviors that Mom was engaging in and some of the people she was talking to. She did say she owned a condo in Ohio. So this condo complex is in Ohio. It's in the town where she said she owned a condo. However, I can't find any property records in her name. But this is clearly not a professional photo, and it was taken from the inside of a condo. I do believe she was at least inside a condo. Maybe she went and looked at it. Maybe she took a tour of it. She may have bought it, but I haven't been able to find any concrete evidence that she bought it, even though she had written on Facebook to others that she had owned this condo. This is a photo of a house that in Ohio that she also told people that she owned. I don't exactly know where this house is in Ohio. Obviously, there's a lake in the background. This photo here on the left, it is a lakefront condo. So I do believe this house is on the same lake. I just don't know exactly where it is. And again, I've searched the county property records online and I can't find any property records in her name. So how did this become a book? It was an accident. As I said it at the beginning of this presentation, complete accident. So I was asked to be a guest on this podcast called Criminal. I didn't know anything about podcasts. This was back in 2016. I didn't know anything about podcasts. Like, I was out of the loop in terms of the podcast craze. And I remember getting the invite, and I remember being asked to go film or to go record the episode at the public radio station in Champaign, Illinois. I remember thinking to myself, why not? At least I could do a Target run afterwards. Because again, I didn't think anybody was going to listen to this. I didn't know that Criminal had a following. Criminal has an international following. And so after the podcast aired, I was getting emails from victims, all over the world, as far away as New Zealand. I was getting media requests from Australia and Ireland, New Zealand, and I ended up doing a drive time interview in Australia, Monday morning drive time, live interview, but that was actually Sunday night, my time. I got up at 2:00 in the morning one morning to do a live drive time morning show for talk radio in Ireland. And morning drive time in Ireland, again, is 2 a.m. Illinois time. So lots of crazy fun stuff, resulted from that podcast. And in that podcast, I said kind of a throwaway line of, and I've started writing a book about my experience. And that book was 20,000 words of scenes that I had written, of things that we had found out about Mom, and things that I was experiencing, physically and emotionally as a result of it, and things that Dad was experiencing as a result of the identity theft, and finding out that Mom was the offender all along. And it wasn't organized, because what I was doing is when something would happen, I would write the present and then try and get my head back into the past, into that worldview that someone else other than Mom, who's responsible for the identity theft, and trying to feel those feelings again and sketch out what was going on before learning that Mom was the perpetrator all along. So it was not an organized 20,000 words. And I thought someday I'll finish it, after I earn tenure, and I'll self-publish it. And I had actually staked out a couple of self-publishers, actually one in Indiana, where I thought, that would be fitting because this crime occurred in Indiana, and they might be nice to work with. And I thought, well, that's what I'll do. I'll self-publish. And as a result of the Criminal podcast, I had a literary agent reach out to me and said she'd heard the podcast, wanted to represent me. And I thought it was a scam, because I knew enough about the literary world to know that authors generally work to find agents, and it's typically not the other way around. So I really thought it was a scam until I researched her and her agency and realized that they were legitimate and pretty well known in the literary as well as the film world. The agency represents folks like Neil Patrick Harris and Ted Danson. And those were names I recognized. So I thought, okay, this is legitimate. I'm going to follow up, and agreed to have this agent represent me. She still represents me today. And she took my 20,000 words and had me work with a ghostwriter to format my 20,000 words into an industry standard book proposal. So, putting the scenes in order, creating character sketches, and getting that ready to send out to editors. So really a lot of that was just taking what I had in those 20,000 words and just doing some reformatting. And she sent the book proposal to a number of editors at traditional publishing houses in New York. And we had a few make offers, and it turned into a bidding war. I remember one day I kept getting phone calls about where things were with the bids. It was it's kind of a nerve-wracking day, but exciting. And ultimately, we went with Grand Central, and yeah, that's how this book came into being. So really exciting. I have to say the hardest part wasn't writing the book, because again, I had a good start on that with the 20,000 words. And then when it was changed to a book proposal, the full book was just expanding on that. I think the hardest part was the promotion. Promoting a book is grueling. I mean, it's exciting, but the week the book came out, I was home for 16 hours that week, home long enough to drive home from the airport, switch out the dirty clothes in my suitcase, put clean clothes in, get some sleep, feed and water the cats, and then take off for the airport again. And by the end of that week, I woke up and I forgot where I was. I'd look at the ceiling, I'm like, okay, what town am I in? It was just, yeah, it was exciting, but it's grueling. So some of the press that the book has received, I've been on the Dr. Oz show, the Mel Robbins show, soon to be on another TV show, the Tamron Hall show, Elle Magazine, Real Simple Magazine, Psychology Today Magazine, First for Women Magazine, the Associated Press, and on and on and on. So lots of attention in October of 19 when the book came out. Still getting some attention. The Tamron Hall show reached out to me last month. So and I've had a couple of other podcast shows reach out to me in the last month as well. So, people are still discovering the book. They're still interested in it. And they're excited about it. And had a lot of victims of familial identity theft reach out to me and say, thank you for sharing your story, because I didn't think anyone else experienced this. No one's talking about it. So the book has received praise from Publishers Weekly in the form of a starred review. I'll be honest with you, this is how naive I am about some aspects of the publishing world. When I saw the review, this would have been in June of 19. So the review came out a few months before the book did. And I saw that it had a star. I mean, the review was good, but I saw it had 1 star. Well, I thought of it as like an Amazon review, a 1-star Amazon review, and I thought it was really bad. And my agent's like, no, this is really, really good. Starred reviews are really hard to come by in Publishers Weekly. Received positive reviews from National Public Radio, Booklist, and Library Journal. I received the 2020 Edgar Award for Best Fact Crime, and was shortlisted for the nonfiction category for the Indiana Authors Awards. So as Kelly mentioned in the beginning, I'm currently an assistant professor of consumer affairs at South Dakota State University. Soon will be the program coordinator for the undergraduate program in consumer affairs. Teach courses on financial planning, financial counseling, family resource management, and grant writing. And again, my research focuses on financial abuse within families. So familial identity theft and elder financial exploitation perpetrated by family members. And I have been talking for a long time. It is 12 till. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see more of you, and we will open the floor for questions.
To make it a little bit easier, why don't we have you type your questions in the chat, and then I can read them off in Axton if you don't mind answering that way. Yeah, I think that might make it simple. So I know we have a few from our book discussion group that we had last month. I think April has those. Okay, so Jan wants to know how long it took you to get your credit rating straightened out.
That took a long time, and it was incredibly frustrating. So I learned that my credit report was a mess in 2001. And as I mentioned, that creditor that I first called and said, "You're not a victim of identity theft." that was my first clue that getting that fraudulent information off my credit report was going to be a long road. And in order to build good credit while getting that fraudulent information taken off my credit report, I knew I had to start building good credit myself. So while I was disputing those fraudulent entries with the credit reporting agencies and with original creditors and the like, I did start building good credit. So my first pre-approved credit offer came in the mail when I was 23 and filled out the application, and I knew the terms were not going to be good. And that credit card came with a 29.99% APR, a $300 annual limit, and a $69 annual fee that they assessed before they sent me the credit card. So I had to pay that bill before they gave me a credit card. And shortly thereafter, I had to get a car loan. The car I was driving wasn't going to make it anymore. And that car loan on a 5-year-old used car, which is now my dad's car, it came with an APR of 18.23%. So while I was struggling to get that fraudulent information removed from my credit report, I was working to build some accounts in good standing at the same time. The fraudulent entries did not fully clear until 2009. Because when you dispute a fraudulent account with an original creditor or with a credit reporting agency, sometimes all of the verification of the debt that occurs is, does the name and the social security number match? Well, in my case, it always did. My social security is, these 9 digits, this is my name. And if those two things matched, then the debt was verified as mine, even though it wasn't. And now that didn't always happen. Let's say it happened probably 50 to 60% of the time. So some of those accounts just ended up aging off.
All right, we have one from Rachel, and she says, how did you not have more debt than what you said in your book? It seems crazy that you didn't have a ton of debt.
Oh, I just refused to pay it. I was like, this is not mine. If I start making payments on the debt, these creditors are going to assume that I'm taking responsibility for it. And it's not mine, and I'm not paying 1 red cent on this. You can fight me in court. You can do whatever you want to do to me. I'm not paying it because it is not mine.
Cindy wants to know how it made you feel when you discovered it was your mother.
So I'll back up a little bit. So Mom passed away on February 12th. And on February 4th, I was giving an invited talk in Washington, D.C. at the Identity Theft Assistance Center's Child Identity Theft Forum. So they asked me to present my dissertation research. And there were a lot of law enforcement folks there, a lot of federal agency folks, FBI, DOJ. And I thought, I'm in the right place to try and get a law enforcement agency to take on our case. That's almost 20 years old by this point. And I talked to an FBI agent who said the case was too old. It would never be solved. Original creditors had long since destroyed the original credit card application, credit card statements, and things of that nature. And it would just be too difficult to solve. And it's just too old. Sorry about your luck. Even with that, I never gave up hope. I thought, someday that happened. And there were 2 extreme at the moment when I figured out that Mom was the person responsible. Sense of triumph, and that after 20 years, this case has been solved. And I did what the FBI said couldn't be done. It was 3 weeks earlier, like, no, it's not solvable. Well, yeah, did it. And the evidence, unfortunately, was right under our nose for a long time. The other emotion was, holy crap, this is Mom. How did I not see this? Why? And I couldn't ask her those things because she's already gone. And there was another dimension to this of, growing up, I wanted to identify who was responsible for the identity theft. And I wanted to hold them accountable. and accountable to me meant, pressing charges and letting the justice system handle it. Well, that part I would never have. I found out who was responsible, but you can't press charges against someone who's deceased. So that part felt very unfulfilled to me. So there's a sense of disappointment in that I'll never be able to, to fulfill that part of the dream that I had.
And kind of following up on that a little bit, Julia wants to know, do you struggle with bitterness towards your mother?
I don't know that bitterness is the right word, but it feels unresolved because I know there's a lot that I still don't know. There's $200,000 approximately that's unaccounted for. Most of that money disappeared within the last 2 years of her life. And it seems to have vanished without a trace. I like to know what it was spent on. I like to know the motivation. However, Mom was such a masterful manipulator, not only of me and Dad, but of her friends as well, that I'm not sure that I would ever get the truth out of her. So I don't know that bitterness is the right word, but it does feel unresolved.
All right. And then out of our book discussion last month, we had someone want to know how your dad is doing.
Okay, so the picture I showed you of me with the award, and sorry, my cat's in here, so I keep looking over to the side because messing with stuff. So the picture I showed in my presentation of me, Mom, and Dad with my national award. Oh shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Will you ask the question again? My cat distracted my train of thought.
Yes. How's your dad doing?
So Dad, the picture. So the picture, he's real clean cut, got short hair, wearing a suit jacket. Okay, not anymore. Mom really kind of controlled what he wore and how he cut his hair. Today, he's fulfilled his dream of having a Harley Davidson motorcycle. He's got a goatee and he's got long sideburns now, long-ish hair. It goes past his shirt collar. He still has Candace in his life, and he's really doing more of what he wants to do now, and he's more of, I think, who he really is. And I think Mom did a lot to stifle that during their marriage, and so he says he's happier now than he's ever been.
I think we're all glad to hear that because we liked your dad when we read the book. So that's good to know.
Is there anyone here that might know my dad? Is there anyone here who ever worked for Marsh? Anyone? Type into the chat or unmute. My dad has worked for Marsh Supermarkets for 46 years. So if you or anyone in your family has a Marsh connection, you probably have heard of my dad. So, or you might have met him. So
Erin wants to know, would you ever write another book? And if so, what would the topic be?
If I learned, I can't say if I learned more about Mom. I've learned some more things about my mom since the book has come out. I don't think I've learned enough to write another book, because there have been some people ask me that, say, oh, you need to write another book. Well, once you find out what your mom did with the money and, any other things that you find out. I don't think I've found out enough yet for another full book. If I were to write another book, it would focus on, what I found out, and then also on, on Dad, how his life has changed for the better.
All right. So we have another kind of two-part question. How did you handle the mental stress and anger associated with having someone stealing your name? And any suggestions for helping the mental health aspects of these crimes?
Okay, so how I handled it prior to knowing that Mom was the offender, well, I was really angry and frustrated with the response I was getting from creditors. And, and every time I would dispute a fraudulent entry on my credit report, and the credit bureau or the original creditor would say, well, it's your name and social security number, so it's your debt. Like, I might as well be screaming into a well, like I'm hearing myself. It's like the echo of my words is coming back at me. No one's listening to me. So that frustration, I channeled it into my research as a graduate student. And, that was a way for me to at least have some sort of control over my destiny and, hopefully improve things for myself as a victim of identity theft, as well as other identity theft victims out there. In terms of the mental health aspect, something that I've started advocating for is tying identity theft and identity theft recovery to this emerging field of financial therapy. So financial therapy is this emerging field that focuses on helping individual clients, just like a financial planner would, but it blends aspects of financial planning and couple and family therapy. So it blends the mental health aspect with the financial aspect. So if let's say you go to a financial planner and you express some sort of frustration with a financial issue, that financial planner is not going to be trained on how to address the emotions surrounding that issue, but they can run the numbers for you and tell you what you need to do. They may not be able to motivate you to do what you need to do because they don't know how to address the emotions. A financial therapist is also trained in the emotional side of money and addressing financial problems. There is an organization out there called the Financial Therapy Association. So the website is financialtherapyassociation.org. And there's a drop-down menu on that website where you can search for practicing financial planners in your area. Honestly, I haven't checked that website for a while. I don't know that there's any in Indiana, but there are financial therapists who do provide services virtually that you could reach out to.
All right, our next question, looking back at the past, was there anything you felt that should have stood out to you or your dad that your mother was the thief? And what was your dad's reaction when he discovered it was her?
So looking back on it, I have a PhD essentially in identity theft. My dissertation focused on identity theft. I spent 2 years of my dissertation doing a deep dive into the identity theft literature and collecting and analyzing data. And I didn't see it. There was a period of time I thought, gee, maybe they should take that PhD away. I feel like a moron. I didn't see this. And, I really think that Mom was so good at manipulating and isolating me and Dad that there's no way we could have seen it because we weren't allowed to talk to other people. And so there was no one from, no other family members, no other close family friends who could offer a different perspective or say, things that maybe they had heard that Mom had said to somebody. There was one time, looking back on it, I was literally standing on the truth. I didn't even know it. And it was when I was doing my master's research. I was talking with Mom about it because I needed money to mail out my survey. I needed to cover the printing and postage costs. And she said, I don't know why you and your dad get so riled up about the identity theft. Identity theft isn't personal. You and your dad just take it so personally. And she said, the identity theft is over. The identity thief has moved on. They're done. They've moved on to somebody else. They're not coming back, to use our identities again. And I remember she was sitting on the front porch and I was walking away towards the barn. And I turned around and I looked at her and I said, the only way you could possibly know that is if you were the one who did it. And she laughed at me. mom had this way of, if you challenged her on anything or questioned her on anything, she had a way of either laughing at you or saying something to you to make you feel like the dumbest person alive for even bringing it up. So you just learn not to bring stuff up. You learn not to question things.
All right, we have one more unless anybody else has a question. So if you have something you want to ask, put it in the chat now. But the last one that we have is, why didn't your dad check on any of the claims that your mother said she did?
Yeah, so good question. So I really think that's a result of the dynamic that was set up in my parents' marriage, I'm sure before I was even born. So my mom had a bachelor's degree in finance. She worked in the financial services industry. And so dad trusted her to handle all things finances. She had the knowledge. She did these things for other people. She was a tax preparer. She was a stockbroker for a number of years. So why not trust her? Also, when he would challenge her and ask her for information, are we getting a tax refund this year, for example? Or, how much do we owe? She would get very defensive and say, well, you don't trust me. And again, that whole dynamic of, if you question her, you're the stupidest person alive, how dare you? I think that affected him as well. I think that was a form of manipulation. And another form of manipulation just in general was, I never really suspect a mom as the offender, because when our utilities would be shut off, when our electricity was shut off, when our landline was shut off, that was affecting her too. She would be sitting there in the dark with me and dad. So, it's like, why would she do that to herself? That was what always really threw me off and really convinced me that she was a victim in all of this too.
All right, we do have one last question.
Okay.
Do you have any desire to reach out to your mom's friends, or do you think they're too manipulated to share anything relevant?
Oh, I have reached out to them. Oh, I think this comes from someone who hasn't read the book yet. No offense, but so I became like an amateur cold case investigator once I found out that mom was the offender. And I started calling her friends that I hadn't seen or spoken to, in some cases, 20, 30 years. If I couldn't find their phone number, I showed up on their doorstep. In fact, I showed up at one person's place of work in Florida. Okay, and asked some pretty hard questions. I went to her 40th class reunion alumni banquet thing in Ohio, and sat at the class of 74 table. Okay, you can tell by looking at me, I'm not class of 74, so I stuck out like a sore thumb. But I asked some hard questions and learned that mom had told her classmates that she was divorced and that she didn't have any children. So it was good that I took some pictures of her when she was in high school. Something inside of me, like little bird whispering in my ear or something, said, take pictures of your mom before you go, in case I needed to prove, that I was who I said I was. And through those pictures, I was able to convince people that, I am her child. Otherwise, why would I have these pictures? And the names didn't match. So mom was going by her maiden name. Well, my last name is not her maiden name. So, there's a disconnect there, I think, with even still today with, a lot of the Ohio connections, that even if they read my book and they knew something, I don't know that they would connect the dots because they knew her by her maiden name and she was telling them she didn't have children. So I still think there are people out there who know things, but may not make the connection between her and me because they don't know I exist and the names don't match up.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been fascinating, and I'm not usually one to read those types of books, but I did read your book and I absolutely loved it. So if you learn anything new, I think we'd all like a update.
Sure. Sure. Well, yeah, before we go, I do have a professional Facebook page, Dr. Axton Betz-Hamilton. I also have Twitter. I keep my Twitter professional. So feel free to add me, follow me, whatever you want to do on social media. And I do update those sites regularly. So you're welcome to go there and stay current with what's happening with my book.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. If you want to buy Axton's book, I did put a link to Wild Geese Bookshop in the chat. They're our bookseller for this event, so big thank you to them. And thanks again to Indiana Humanities for partnering with us on this, and to Axton and the Friends of the Library for sponsoring our program. So be on the lookout for our next Authors at JCPL event. We're working on something for summer and hope to have it announced sometime soon. But thanks again, and I hope you all have a good evening.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.